30th day of December 2024. Hello everybody, welcome. A few little issues getting up and running, but we're up, and so let's get after it. We got a poll for everybody tonight. Hope you're having a great day. A really good show for everybody. Instead of Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I put down NRA, so sue me. Instead of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, should Congress and Parliament have the authority to make it illegal to harm you with radiation? Because currently they don't have the authority to make it illegal to kill you and poison you with anthropogenic man-made radiation. So this story came out, I think it was 2018. Protester and ex-candidate to plead guilty to seeking nuclear material but would not get prison under the deal. And an FBI sting on the dark web. He pleaded guilty to a charge that didn't involve jail. And so he's originally charged with a nuclear terrorism charge, but his lawyers submitted a file for a series of motions to dismiss the charge because the government didn't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation. Only the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has the authority. The government has the authority to poison you with 3,000 chemicals, but the only poison they're not allowed to have the authority for some idiot reason is radioactive fallout or actual nuclear. And so they're not allowed to inject you with 3,000 chemicals, but they're allowed to inject you with anthropogenic man-made radiation, which is typically what caused you to get sick in the first place. Typically what caused you to get sick in the first place. I'm Dana. I hope you're doing well. This wonderful day before New Year's Day. We got New Year's coming. Hopefully the nuclear industry comes over to the winning side. You can call into these live shows at 709-589-4406. 4406. And again, my apologies for taking so long to get online. It was beyond my control. I had to restart everything. And then my computer crashed. There was a lot of things happened. It looked like somebody didn't want me to stream tonight. There is no show tomorrow night. There is another show tomorrow afternoon, though. And that won't be a full show, but it'll be a show nevertheless. And that's because there's no show tomorrow night. There's no show on New Year's Day, the 1st, which is Wednesday. There is a show on Thursday night. And then, because we're starting a new year, which is crazy. Because, I have my folder for my shows is, 2015 folders, etc., right? And so this year's 2024 folder. And when you look at all these folders, it just blows your mind. And so this folder gets closed after tomorrow, and I got to start up a 2025 folder with a January folder inside of it. It's just absurd when you think of it, how much work we've done trying to educate the population worldwide of the incredible danger of radiation. So it's not illegal to poison you with radiation. That's why we got a poll tonight asking the question, should, instead of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I put NRA for some reason down there. Should Congress, and I didn't have enough room to put the word should, so I put must. So instead of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, should Congress and parliaments and the governments have the authority to make it illegal to harm or poison or kill you with radiation? They have the authority to do it for 3,000 chemicals, but they don't have the authority to do with man-made radiation. So if they made it illegal to poison you with radiation, the A-10 Warthog couldn't fly around poisoning you with dirty bombs. They shoot 1.5 tons a minute of depleted uranium, low-level radioactive material has gone through a chain reaction. And so this is a story from 2019, almost the end of 2019. Studied the question of a disposal of 35.7 million dirty bombs. When they say with a core of depleted uranium, that's quite deceptive because they're not coated, they're not tipped, they're pure uranium that has gone through a chain reaction. And so they're going to be saturated with all kinds of isotopes. And when they're going through the air of these, that's an A-10 Warthog he stood up alongside of. When it's going through these cannons, these are dirty bombs. They all meet. Like if I took one of them and done what they're doing in your country, your community, that's considered a dirty bomb. You're contaminating everything. They're pyrophoric. As they go through the air, they catch fire and they burn at around 3,000 degrees. And so when they hit objects, which is typically houses and automobiles instead of hardened bunkers, which is what they're only supposed to be used on, they contaminate all the air, the water, the food, the streams, the land, the farms for millions of years. It's an insidious thing to do. And they can't quantify, but it's not illegal to poison you with radiation. Congress and parliaments, like in Canada's a parliament, United States is a Congress. In Japan, the government is called a diet instead of a Congress or a parliament. And none of them have the authority. Only the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is appointed by the president. They're there, say the administration is there for 4 years. Those people that are making the decisions are there for 4 years. So if you did make it in one particular country or make it illegal to poison you with anthropogenic man-made radiation, the next administration would appoint somebody to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, would reverse that and would then make it not illegal. And so if it was illegal, they couldn't use that. They couldn't trick people going back into the nuclear wastelands, for instance. There would be serious repercussions. You couldn't use it in hospitals to destroy your health. And most of the illnesses, like the cancer clusters, epidemics showed up in the 70s after all that nuclear open-air detonations, which is the same as a nuclear war. It's the same as a nuclear war. And so new images from Fukushima press tour. This is 2013, where they released these pictures. This was the so-called ELPS decontamination system. Allegedly, we're decontaminating water even today, right? This is the allegation. Now remember, that's 2013. That's February? Yeah, February 2013. 2014 in August, they were suggesting that they might have the ELPS system operational by the end of the year, early 2015. So you're talking about 4 years after the meltdowns. So 4 years after this is when they allegedly finally had filtration system. Okay, so they had 1,000 tanks. Now you can fill up the tanks 6 times a day with each reactor. Normally they need 4,500 tons of water, 1 million gallons of water. You can fill up all the tanks, 1,000 tanks. Not that we found 1,000 tanks on that site. Every time we counted the tanks from the pictures that were released, the most we got was 750. As far as we know, the tanks are empty. Because when you're pouring water over a nuclear meltdown and you're using wells to siphon the water back up around the site, that's how they're allegedly doing it. And you're putting that in the tanks. Anything you're pouring over that is lethal by the liter. From gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bombardment, beta rays, alphas. And what that means is the tanks would be 1 million plus sieverts of just beta, for instance. Forget about the gammas, neutrons, and alphas. Not that you should, not that you would, but just forget about them for a second and just look at, just say, betas or alphas or gammas or whatever. There's so much radiation in a tank that you can't get near. You can't build another tank close by, within a couple of 100 feet or 1,000 feet by rates. And then any lines to the tank going through the alleged ELP system would carry significant health hazards like death after 2 minutes walking by the hoses kind of doses. So if you try to filter it at the ELP system, what would happen if you're trying to filter it, then the filter after an hour would be thousands and thousands of sievers. So even if it was 6 feet thick lead, it still couldn't shield the forklift operator to go in and pick up a filter and move it somewhere. It's a lethal dose. But after a couple of hours, anybody in that building would get a lethal dose that would melt their organs in about 15 minutes. It's the same kind of doses, but it's actually much higher doses we're talking about there. It was at Hiroshima. In Hiroshima, Nagasaki, there was a lot of people found outside the blast zone from the radiation exposures. What happened was their organs melted, and they literally sat down, dropped their pants, and excreted their organs, and then just some of them were just found in that position dead. And many of them just, of course, fell over, but they died. And I know that sounds crazy, or it's pretty rough thought, but that's what happened. And there's no way to sugarcoat it, right? There really isn't. So in 2014, it certainly wasn't up and running. So the water, like imagine a reactor needs 4,500 tons a minute. Imagine you're stood up on the side of your road, and every minute for 60 years, there's 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks with a ton of water in the back of it, 1,000 liters, 2,200 pounds, flashing by your house. 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks. Or it'll melt down. So it needs 2 gas, oil, coal plants dedicated to it 24 hours a day. They don't have to be right at the site, but you need dedicated transmission lines. And because radiation, you know, at ground zero, this is absurdness. But even far away, in the first year, there was over 865,000 excess cancers. Not everybody's got health care. Not everybody's diagnosed. Cancer is not the only disease, or illness, or autoimmune deficiency or injury. The radiation covered the entire planet within the first 30 days. All the models agree upon that. The reactors detonated, and there wasn't an academic on the planet in the nuclear industry that didn't know that the fuel pools in the reactor cores were gone. And when they seen these pictures in 2013, there was not a single university, academic, scientist, student, nuclear expert, nuclear company on the entire planet, nowhere on this planet, that didn't know the fuel pool in the reactor cores were gone, yet they still remain silent today. In fact, they went to the media, the insane media, actually went to Japan, but because they got 70 identical reactors in the United States, they faked the footage to the right and claimed that they were in Japan on the top of the building to the left. And it wasn't just those 4. There was this is some of the other medias. There's a lot more than that. And so for that lie to work, right, come out and tell that kind of a lie, you needed the cooperation of every media on the planet and every university on the planet and all key government nuclear environmental protection agencies / everything else to participate in that lie, to not call them out, to not create a controversy. We done research expeditions showing an extinction event from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. And now we see the same thing in the Atlantic Ocean. And now we also know this is true symmetrically all the way down to New Mexico. And we went out there for 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year in brutal condition. The French government's model of the IRSN, which is the French government's radioactive fallout based on 15 days, is 1 million atoms to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. So when you got a plume, you got acknowledgement, studies acknowledging you had at least that much. In the first 15 days, this is the radioactive fallout covering all of Canada, all the United States. And denial is simply that, is denial. We also know that they had plume models of 1 million atoms of cesium or xenon-133. When you see that BQ, that what's known as the Becquerel is a pulse of energy almost at the speed of light per atom. So you got 1 million pulses of energy per cubic meter. So that's full body X-rays for starters for every species in a cubic meter, and we're talking about a cubic meter of the whole planet, every cubic meter. And we're talking about airborne radiation of 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137, which is pulsing energy 600 feet. We also got studies, this is a Canadian study, showing 20 million particles. So this is 20 million pulses of energy almost at the speed of light every second. Think of 20 million atoms, but it's much worse. It's much more energetic because it's particles that are ionized and radiated and atomized and aerosoled. And so the iodine-131, we know there's a ratio of 10 times more iodine-132, 30 times more iodine-133. There's 31 times more iodine-129. We've got another study from Ottawa, Canada, acknowledging that. So the iodine-132 and the iodine-133, which are 10 times more, 30 times more respectively, are 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating your thyroid gland than the incredibly effective iodine-131 was. And the iodine-131 was brutal for insects and birds, mammals and animals. We got studies showing radioactive fallout of the neptunium-239. We have similar studies of the plutonium-239. The neptunium-239 decays after 2.5 days. There's 10 different decays to plutonium-239 in 2.5 days to something that don't decay for 24,000 years, and there's 10 half-lives. So the half-life of neptunium-239 is times 2.5 times 10, 25 days, which is enough to circle the whole planet. But along the way, it's going to decay. There's 10 different decays every 2.5 days. 50% of it, roughly, it could be 46, it could be 56. But 50% of it roughly decays to another isotope. And there's 10 different isotopes when it decays. And in this case, it's going to last for 24,000 years before it decays to something else, which could last 250,000 years. This is something that shouldn't be on your planet. And look at the model itself. So look at that model there. That's based on 20 days to your left hand, 21 days behind me, of radioactive fall of neptunium-239. We have the same model based on the same numbers from TEPCO of plutonium-239. So you have xenon-133 showing you the same model. You have cesium-137 showing you the same model. And then for every cesium-137, there's significant more 134. Which is a brutal ionizing, radiating isotope. It means you're saturating the thyroid glands of every species and the stem cells of every species, particularly the developing young species, because insects and birds, mammals, and animals reproduce such a prolific amount compared to humans. Then you'll see the broken food chain showing up originally, right? So you have cesium-137. This is not all of them by no shape or means. At 1 million atoms to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air, you had, which pulses energy 600 feet. You have xenon-133 covering the entire planet, particularly North America and Canada. You have rainfall at the most horrifying numbers. I can't find any literature that is worse than this stuff. This is the worst known to humans. This is something that was never conceived publicly anyway. I'm sure the industry conceived it because they built the reactors on a fault line with 1,000 earthquakes a year within a short distance of the tectonic plates where they knew there was going to be multiple shocks and certainly significant tsunamis. But there's a 3,000-year legacy. They built these reactors in a place where this was guaranteed to happen. So we know that there's 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133. There are 9 times more effective ionizing and radiating the thyroid glands than the 131, which is incredibly effective. We know that when you're inhaling the particles, you increase the radiation exposure by a factor of 1 trillion. And we know that 220,000 atoms, these are unbelievable numbers. So they don't pulse energy a long way, but it's enough to destroy your chromosomes, your DNA, your cells every second of your life. And you can bioaccumulate an absurd amount of this stuff. The natural elements that we have, like potassium, magnesium, we use that up, and we can only replenish what we normally can contain. So your body can typically have 7,500 atoms of potassium-40, which is harmless. Can't make a dirty bomb out of it. Or nuclear or anything else out of it. But your body just recovers that through water, through food, through anything you eat, right? And then just replenishes. But you don't get more. You don't get 10,000 atoms. You don't get 30,000. You don't bioaccumulate potassium or magnesium or anything else. You just replenish your body's normal operating. It's like putting gas in your gas tank. You can't just put as much as you like in a gas tank, right? Gas tank will only hold so much. Your body is the same way. Okay, so then in 2013, the BBC put out a video with Rupert Winfield Hayes. And he tells you all the tanks were full in 2013. But it wasn't just him. He has TEPCO actually say those words. So we're going to play that video for you. That's an absurdly important video. I'm going to duck out of here. I'll be right back.
Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an underground aquifer. Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
So let me do that again. This is TEPCO saying the water released from the site is out of control. They got no control in 2013. So no control 2011, no control 2012, no control 2013. And that you're going to find that tanks were all full.
We understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tons of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Wingfield Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
So they can be prosecuted under the racketeering statutes.
But they can be prosecuted on the racketeering statutes or promoting fraud, or presenting themselves to medical professionals as an arbiter of truth and as a neutral referee and a reliable referee of the truth. And they know that those medical professionals are relying on journal articles to treat patients, and that if they tell a lie, if they're committing fraud, that they can injure and kill people. So, I believe they can be prosecuted, and not only can they be prosecuted for those injuries, but they can be prosecuted on the racketeering statutes or promoting fraud.
So they can be prosecuted under the racketeering statutes. Florida has announced that they're going to be using radioactive waste to build roads, which is absurdness, right? We've seen a video. I've seen a video of a man with a Geiger counter showing over 300 counts per minute on the ground. The decision has stirred optimism and alarm, and as experts weigh, and you got to be very careful when it comes to nuclear experts, they're the ones that have been cutting your throats for 80 years. As the degenerates weigh potential economic benefits against the public health risks. Well, because it's not illegal to poison you with radiation, there's not much to stop them. Because Congress and Parliament doesn't have the authority. Congress and Parliament doesn't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation. So instead of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I put the Nuclear Regulatory Aider, which is oops. Instead of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, should Congress and Parliament have the authority to make it illegal to harm or kill or maim you with radiation? Because they don't have the authority, and this is why they're able to get away with building roads with radioactive waste. This is a different type of waste. This is not the stuff that's gone through a chain reaction, but it's still brutal because it's concentrated. So phosphorus gypsum, to extract phosphorus rock is dissolved in acid. That process separates uranium, which ends up in the acid, and radium, which remains in the leftover material. And the remaining waste is called phosphogypsum. Early this week, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the ones that are poisoning you constantly, grandfathered in 60,000 chemicals in 1979 when they were created, without no human environmental impact studies, approved a pilot project by Mosaic, which is a fertilizer company, the largest phosphate producer in the United States. The project involves building 4 test road sections at Mosaic's new Wales facility in Polk County, Florida, using phosphogypsum as a road base. So rather than storing it, which is part of their contract, right, part of their charter of a company, by the way, they've gotten so big now that they're above the laws. In 1992, the Internet Environmental Protection Agency, which I don't know why you would call those people that words, cited potential dangers for construction workers and future residents living near roads containing phosphogypsum. Exceptions have been made for controlled, get a load of this, agricultural and research use. So in the 1990s, the demons were at it. Russia got another icebreaker, nuclear icebreaker. I think that's number 8, is it? They scuttled the Lenin icebreaker from, Leningrad. They scuttled that with the reactors, dumped them in the Arctic along with 18,000 other dumps from nuclear. Rosatom now has 8 nuclear-powered icebreakers in operation, the highest numbers since the Soviet Union. These are Fukushima on waters floating around, banging in the ice all day. And they've dumped so much of this reactors and that into the oceans and into the most pristine environments to just truly scum of the scum. They really are the degenerates of degenerates. This is a 14-story building you're looking at. So when people say, oh, Dan, there's a small modular reactor, it's not, though. It's a 14-story building. Very sophisticated one. A very inefficient one, really, because they don't need any potential from the reactors they're using. They had to build a pretty big reactor because they can't build a small one. So these are actually huge reactors, but they only needed so much energy, right? And when you look at the history, and Mermax they got 190 nuclear subs ran up on the beaches. That was like 4 or 5 years ago, and they had no way of decommissioning them. They just ran them up on the beaches and walked away from it. They had them sinking in the harbor, sinking at the wharf. Nuclear reactors. They have no way. When they built these things, there was no way. They didn't build like a way for you to decommission it. No way to get in there. Afraid the seals would fail, right? So now they got another stupid disease factory up polluting the most pristine place on the planet. That's the normal for the nuclear industry. There's nothing that they won't pollute. They'll go through hell to get there so they can pollute it. And they're crushing the ice so they can export liquid natural gas. And they got all their service lives prolonged. The sunken nuclear submarine and its effects on the environment. You know that story, we covered it last night. They said it'll take 1,000 years for the submarine's hull to rust away. That's simply absurd. And that was the Norwegian or the Dutch done a study with the Russians. They scuttled it. There were 17 ships here, there, everywhere. 17 ships and barges loaded with radioactive waste are dumped there in the Arctic. There's 16 nuclear reactors dumped there, 6 of them with the spent uranium and fuel still on board. 6 reactor cores dumped in the Arctic, the most pristine place on the planet. In 1986, a Russian submarine with 27 nuclear bombs sank. 27 nuclear bombs. An explosion erupted in the silo, ejecting the missiles and its warheads into the ocean. Imagine how radioactive the fish and the ecosystem for 1,000 miles around here is actually going to be. It's a disgusting industry. A false map shows Germany surrounded by nuclear power plants. It looked like, I think what that was all about was small modular reactors in the near future. That's what the plan was. Not that they're ever going to exist. An old misleading map has resurfaced showing the German borders lined with 30 nuclear disease factories. They're spread across Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Switzerland, Austria, the Czech Republic, Poland, Denmark, who all happen to be buying into small modular reactors, and that's where they're going to put them. But this is the actual maps of nuclear reactors, and you can see where Germany is too. So what's the difference? Radiation doesn't respect any borders. It's worth noting that the map only shows plants that are in operation. It doesn't show the nuclear dumps. It doesn't show the nuclear waste sites. It doesn't show the reprocessing sites. Right? They're scumbags. This industry is just scumbags. Speaking of scumbags, the World Nuclear Association. Well, they're a lobbying group, and there's nothing too evil for them to do, I'll tell you that much. And Germany shut down their reactors, but they're all still there with their fuel, hemorrhaging, splitting atoms into the environment 24 hours a day. Nano Nuclear Energy reports a fiscal year 2024 results and provides a corporate outlook. Like the best you do is run away from nano as far as you can. Nano's for stupid people. Don't be stupid. I made a poll last night. Is nuclear power the dirtiest, most resource-intensive, dangerous, and have the evilest people employed? Oh, hell yeah, Data, that's a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer. Flamanville EPR connection. What does it really mean for us? This is, you talk about stupid. Here's stupid for you when it comes to nuclear. This is your typical nuclear story. After 17 years of construction and a 12-year delay. Dana, nuclear is the best thing for climate. Shut up. Well, first off, nuclear is going backwards because of this particular attribute. France, of course. French nuclear tests exposed the entire Polynesian populations to radiation, a new study revealed. It was infinitely worse than that. The French Polynesians were exposed to roughly a Nagasaki bomb every week for 12 years. That was the equivalent in radioactive fallout. Every week for 12 years. And if you know anything about radiation fallout, it never goes away. It just bioaccumulates more and more every day. Not every year, but every single day every year. And the Sahara radioactive dust returns radiation from the French nuclear tests to France, because that's where the dust ends up blowing, right towards France. And the oceans gets contaminated. With radioactive fallout from the French nuclear test, this was a 2021 study. France still won't clean up or tell the Algerians where the nuclear dump is to in Algeria. They destroyed everybody's health over there. What France done and continues to do is that's a country that should go the way of the Soviet Union, where it's dissolved. Only problem is you're going to destroy people's pensions and patents. Outside of that the country should be dissolved. There's such a burden on humanity for so long. This will haunt humanity for 1 billion years. Every one of these stories. Now, France says, the French Polynesians, that there was no adverse side effects, yet they're giving out millions of iodine pills because of side effects from radioactive fallout from nuclear plants. There's no irony there, is it? They're such scumbags. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter has died at the age of 100. How many kids' bloods was he drinking, I wonder? Jimmy Carter, the self-peanut farmer, the humanitarian former Navy lieutenant, helped Canada avert a nuclear catastrophe. They didn't avert a nuclear catastrophe. The reactor melted down. They got to put stuff like that there, see? Being a scumbag is the only thing that they're good at. That's the only thing they accelerate at. Yeah, the nuclear testing was the nuclear weapons testing. Right behind that, we've seen catastrophic health consequences worldwide. In all species, too. That was the decline. You can trace the decline of all the species back to the nuclear race, so to speak, when they were doing all these testings. Like Nagasaki, Hiroshima, radiation from that was found from the atomized and aerosoled, ionized and radiated humans and animals and everything else. That radiation was found in the glaciers worldwide within 1 year. Every glacier, they were finding that fingerprint. Well, now we got 1,000 fuel pools hemorrhaging radiation because the fuel is still splitting atoms. The reason fuel is dangerous, high-level radiation is dangerous, is because it's splitting atoms. Not just from gammas, alphas, neutrons, beta shines, and X-rays and everything, but from the actual splitting atoms, physical atoms. It's coming from 1,000 different sites, these invisible plumes. You can't see it or hear it or feel it or taste it or perceive it or touch it. And I'll give you an example of what we're talking about. There's 1,000 fuel pools. Worldwide that are doing this each day to your planet. It's a continuous pluming coming out of them 24 hours a day. Continuous plumes. And so their emissions, this one is in plutonium. All plants, the fuel pools are hemorrhaging curium isotopes, which is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod is the curium isotopes. Back to Jimmy Carter, though. Hang on. There's 1,000 fuel pools that are splitting atoms every day. This is what it looks like if you were to make models of plumes. And these models, by the way, are based on venting from Fukushima, not actually based on the nuclear meltdown or the inventories. They still don't acknowledge, as particularly, as of August the 24th last year, 2023, the International Atomic Energy went on a worldwide press conferences saying there is no nuclear meltdown at Fukushima and everything is in the tanks. And that's only tritium, 2.2 grams of tritium. I mean, and there was no opposition. All the media was happy to come out and regurgitate an outrageous narrative, which means we lost our planet, right? And they're going to punish me tonight, are they? Nobody on my show. I've only been doing it for a decade, I suppose. Instead of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, that's what is punishing me because we got a real poll there again. Should Congress and parliaments have the authority to make it illegal to harm you with radiation? Because they don't. And that's the most dangerous statement conceivable. So Jimmy Carter lived to be 100, the oldest living U.S. president in American history. They went through a lot to keep him alive longer, just to try to give him a good image for the nuclear industry, right? Secret soldiers trained to fly with a nuclear bomb between their legs. Secret soldiers. Stupid soldiers is what they meant, probably, but their editor wouldn't let them print that one. Yeah, put a nuclear bomb. Who wants to kill a couple of million people? Can you imagine how stupid you got to be to do that job? Well, it's not a job because you join the military, you can't quit. They put you in the stockade, keep you there in jail for years and years and years. You can't quit your job and say, I'm not going to kill all these women and children no more. No, you got to kill those women and children. And if they say to napalm them like they done to North Korea, you got to napalm them. Terrible subjects in that. Let's talk about. Whenever I talk about real terrible, that bother me personally because I'm not immune, right, to this stuff. I usually try to switch topics, but as you finish briefing the group, they were talking about these training runs. They didn't know if it was real or not, and so they had to go through the motions as if it was real. Put a bomb between your leg, jump out of a plane. Don't know if it's real or not. They don't tell you till after. And they would dump them basically in the ocean for the most part. And they had suicide pills, and even if they succeeded, they had explosives to destroy everything in case they had to leave it behind, right? And they were under fire, and they were supposed to blow it up, which would be a massive dirty bomb. And they were passing out these badges. So imagine they would be worth a lot of money today, these types of badges. Imagine they're worth a couple of $1,000 each or something, just a badge. Yeah, these were... I can't... Like, the British had a version, the original version of the Navy SEALs, where they would lather themselves up with grease from the ship's propeller room. And that's really thick grease, right? And because back in them days, you can imagine, right, how crazy that statement is. So they covered their whole body with that, and then they would stick canvas onto it. And they were known as the swimming canoeist. And these people can cover roughly, I think it was 400 miles in 24 hours on land and water. There's some of these records they had created were pretty incredible. And they were swimming canoeists. So they would swim with the canoe. So they have a very low profile. So they had a special type of canoe, like like a surfer's board kind of thing, but much more slicker for an application. They were carrying weight, weapons, and everything else. And they would swim from 20 miles offshore into the coastline, swim up the rivers, and hike 10 miles with their canoe and equipment, and get back into a big body of water and cover huge distances and hike again. Some really amazing stories came out of there. So they can go kill somebody, right? This fruit right here, another Michael, of course, Scott. He said, we live in Orwellian times, the deceitful anti-Semitic reporting on the Israeli military campaign. And Gaza doesn't even exist. What military campaign? Like, there's nothing left to that country. They flattened the entire country, turned it to dust. And he calls it gaslighting because people, they don't have the right to use the word anti-Semitic anymore, okay? They abrogated those rights. They're like you. They're scumbags, buddy. Magnitude 5.8 earthquake hit Japan's Fukushima. So that's the third story that I found about a significant 5.8 earthquake. I'm sorry, this is a different story. They'll do that too, where they'll put out an old story. So there was two stories came out about a 5.3 earthquake just off the coast of Fukushima. But they tell you the depth, but they won't tell you the distance. And the distance for anywhere else, they'll give you the distance off whatever city and the depths. But now you only get the depth. And there's a very shallow earthquake, but we do know that it's right off the coastline of Fukushima. And as I showed you earlier, those buildings, they put covers over these buildings, but underneath the building, this is what they look like. They're to your left, they're completely destroyed. So they're very fragile. They're very capable of melting down again. They're, a lot of it was in reactor 4 and reactor 3 were rejected. Reactor 3 in particular, the fuel pools in reactor cores were rejected. But the problem is, when it comes to earthquakes in Japan, in 2018 they had a significant earthquake in the northern part, and so they called it a 6.6 magnitude, but it was a 6.2 on the Shindu scale, which is 7. And when you look at the damage, they suppressed it, right? But when you look at this damage, this is caused by the earthquake. That was a road. The road was torn apart. The country was split apart. This is the landslides, and when you see the landslides, right, you can kind of understand the landslides there. But it's hard to appreciate how significant these landslides were. So this is all the payloads on all the mountains for a very long range. All the mountains collapsed. Have you ever seen an earthquake do that before? But they were calling it a 6.6 magnitude, which most people are like, I don't care so much about it. But the reality of it was, when you zoom in, look at these landslides, and then you'd look at the enormity of the landslides, the distance of landslides, all sides of the mountains lost their payloads. Now, there was a nuclear power plant about 30 miles away. And when it comes to earthquake, that's not a long distance, right? There's 4 million people lost power for multiple days. And to today, we still don't know if there was any damage. But when you look at the significance of the damage, when you look at the way that the Earth was split wide open, it's very emblematic of what we've seen last year, or this year, January the 1st, which anniversary is just 2 days away, in Ishikawa Prefecture on the Noto Peninsula. But it was also Ishikawa Prefecture, Niigata Prefecture, which was north of the Ishikawa Prefecture, north of Noto Peninsula. The Niigata Peninsula had one of the oldest, or one of the biggest nuclear reactors in the world. And around that facility with 6,500 houses that were tilted over or collapsed due to liquefaction. And they're currently going to open up some of those reactors and restart them. And now that fault line that cracked in January the 1st of this year in Ishikawa Prefecture in Nagata and the Noto Peninsula is a 3,000 to 4,000 year old fault line that has been dormant for 3,000 to 4,000 years. It was over 100,000 structures were damaged. There was 1,500 landslides. There was at least 1,600 aftershocks. And the aftershocks went from 20 a year average, like small earthquakes, 20 a year, to the 2 years previous of the earthquake this year, they were getting average around 7,000 a year, something like 22 earthquakes a day. They should have moved people out of there, right? There was also a tsunami, and that the earth itself was lifted up 13 feet on the coastline and inland too, right in one of the nuclear power plants included. 13 feet high for 80 kilometers of coastline was lifted up 13 feet. So there was harbors that actually disappeared, that were now dry. Boats sat dry above ground where the ocean floor came up. So it wasn't just like the coastline, like a strip of coastline. It was entire bays had lifted up 13 feet. Quite impressive, right? My back is shot today again. I was out. I got a problem with my winch. I'm pretty sure now that it's solenoid. Because I went out today to get pictures of it so I can order one. And there's a lot of corrosion, a stupid amount of corrosion, right? I used it a few days back to drag the snowmobile off this little hump because the ground is frozen, you couldn't get traction. And so once I got it a few feet, the Skidoo just glided right back in, which, by the way, I've done the registration on that today, $340. I don't have anymore. Again, like, you got to do this stuff. There's so many. You can't cut corners, right? Because for a lot of the trails there, you got to have registration. So that means I can't get the battery for. So I'm going to take the battery out tomorrow. I got it on the charger doing the resulfur. I'm going to take it out. You can service that particular battery. And I got another battery out there. I'm going to scavenge some acid. In fact, I think I got enough maybe in one of my bottles with the hoses so I can fill it up, top it up, and then put it back on, charge it, then desulfur it. I got a really good, thank God I bought that battery charger where you can desulfur. I got two that can do it. One's a cheap one, but I got a really nice one that I only pull out to do jobs like this, and then resulfur it and see if it holds the charge for it. Maybe I can squeak by for a little while. We're expecting snow next weekend. We'll be out every day in the snow this year. I'll be out there every day. I got most of the gear, I think, now. So anyway, it's didn't mean to digress. My back is like aching, so just give me a second. I gotta grab a pillow I can put behind my back. Only take me a minute. Take me a minute. You gotta do that because I had a hard time getting the stream to work tonight. I almost gave up on it. And I was pretty sure I was going to get it. And then I was supposed to get a pillow I put behind my back so I can. I don't have to use the extra muscles because I hurt myself when I was changing the brakes on the truck there last month, right? Grinder tore my hands up, and strangled my arm. And so I went in to get peroxide. When I came out, I slipped on the steps and busted myself up. So I'm still recovering from that. And every time I go out and do something, it hurts like hell. But I usually recover the next day pretty good. Today, I didn't. I was out doing more and didn't mean to digress. Here we go again. Let's keep going here. Japan's reactor that restarted 13 years after Fukushima is shut down again. Is that the... Oh, that's the Okinawa reactor. That's north of the Fukushima. And they went into station blackout and couldn't achieve cold shutdown for quite a while. So we don't know how much damage really happened there. It had to be shut down again 5 days after restart due to a glitch in the matrix that occurred on Sunday in a device related to neutron data inside the reactor. First off, they're not going to give you enough so you can extrapolate stuff on your own, typically. That's typical of these crazies. The reactor was operating normally and then it wasn't. And there's no release of the radiation into the environment, says the scumbags. Don't believe these people. When they say that, you should be terrified. What do you say? 3 reactors melted down. And so that's an interesting statement. They refused to acknowledge reactor 4 melted down. Isn't that convenient for them, right? They hid that from the population because it came out originally that if reactor 4 melted down, they were going to have to evacuate Tokyo. Despite the fact that reactor 3 right alongside of it ejected the reactor core and the fuel pools right out of the buildings, which is even worse. You're talking about 9 reactor cores melting down at one time. This is reactor 4. So what they decided to say was that didn't happen. That's what kind of low life the pro-nuclear actually is. They're the lowest forms of life you're ever going to come across. You might not be able to appreciate that, particularly if you're an insider. But to pretend that you're in a building that don't exist, which means you're poisoning humanity on a scale we've never conceived. It's never been postulated before. Just that one building, there's 4 of these buildings that lost their entire inventories. They refuse to acknowledge that that happened. Despite the fact you can go to TEPCO and get that picture right now. And that there's not a nuclear scientist, a nuclear academic, a nuclear company, a nuclear employee in the government, industries, or whatever. There's the Environmental Protection Agency. There's nobody on the planet that is aware of nuclear, didn't know that was gone, the reactor cores of the fuel pools. 9 reactor cores gone. And you say, well, the reactor 4 wasn't running. This is a standard lie. It doesn't matter that they weren't running. They were doing a fuel change, which meant 1/3 of the fuel was coming out, and it meant 2/3 of the fuel was still in the reactor core. And 2/3 of 600,000 pounds is still a lot of absurd amount of fuel, right? And then when you finally look at the picture, you realize the fuel pools are gone. And you realize that these people can be charged under the racketeering statutes because they're guilty, right, of telling a lie to manipulate the population. And so people stayed there and destroyed their lives. There's 865,000 extra cancers alone in the first year. And they say releasing large amounts of radiation. No, it didn't release large amounts of radiation. It released all the radiation, every bit of it. And so people like that could be charged in North America under the racketeering statutes and convicted, lose their degrees and go to jail, incredible fines, lose their properties. And they should. They should lose all their personal properties, should be auctioned off to pay restitution. This was the 13th of the 33 still usable reactors to restart. Well, they're not that reusable. You wouldn't believe what they had to do to get it running again. So the earthquake they're talking about here, the Noto Peninsula that I was just alluding to earlier, was on January the 1st of this year, 2024, which is just the anniversary is 2 days away. We're expecting another. I'm expecting another earthquake on January the 1st, to tell you the truth. because this is a fault line that's been dormant for 3,000 to 4,000 years. But 2 years previous, it became very active, where you're getting 20 earthquakes a day, 20-something earthquakes a day, when it used to be 20 a year, 20 tremors, small earthquakes a year. Now they were getting 20 much more severe every single day. So 2 years later, they had this puppy. It damaged more than 100,000 structures. We still haven't got any pictures of the Shik community, which was a 7 out of a 7 on the Shindu scale for earthquake. There was a couple of pictures came out where the roads looked like a spaghetti, and they had these big saddles torn apart. Every telephone pole on both sides of the roads was tilted over the road. You seen houses that were just flattened. When you got these, there was a 150-mile crack across that peninsula. 150 mile, where the peninsula was torn apart. Let me bring up some pictures, actually. I could do that. That's always fun. Trust me, this will be fun. Yeah. It's going to be a good time. Like a barbecue. Think of it as a barbecue. Get the kids around the TV. I will introduce you to the good stuff. Did I... Bear with me. I'll find it. I'm not sure. I know one of these got a folder with all the... We'll get there in a second. It's worded. We'll find it. Bear with me. How hard can it be, Dana? Okay, let me do this another way. Here we go. Yeah, it was they had a major fire and it burnt forever. They had tsunamis. They had significant catastrophic damage. I'm about to show you. But I do have a folder there. I just don't know where it's to because it's been a year. Because originally they were showing you this footage of where the fire was to, so we got a lot of those pictures. But I was just looking for the ones where they got the earth cracked wide open. They were going landslides and stuff like that. We're in business. Hopefully. And also shows you Nagata. Here we go. You can see the buildings. That was from the tsunami. The buildings crushed together. But you can see that was the earthquake damage, but that was fire damage. There was a tsunami ran through that place too. It was 1,500 landslides. And at the fault line was between Nagata Sado Island and the Noto Peninsula, which is that little peninsula splitting up there. And so Nagata, on this side of land, is where there's a reactor. There was 6,500 homes were destroyed by liquefaction. And this place was like 1,000-year-old buildings there, like businesses and that. And the tsunami was in the same area. Incredible damage. Yeah, there was buildings that actually tipped over. And my goodness, they were calling this a tremor. Like there was 150 miles right across the island was ripped open. There was no way to get through, pass over that because it ripped, the whole highways were ripped apart, right? deep ground. Why would they frame the narrative that way? Deep ground repository, deep geological repository, deep underground geological repository. I've never seen it called a deep ground nuclear repository. Right? They were trying to misrepresent whoever wrote that headline. It's just, how could they not know, or they just got it? Even if you just got it at a university, you would know better than that. You would hope, right? A deep ground is supposed to be a deep underground geological repository. A deep geological repository is the typical DGR, right? That's the typical acronym. Deep geological repository, so it's deep underground. So the idea is they need a square kilometer for the surface. Now everything is shipped to these deep geological repositories that still theoretically don't exist, is vented. Like the Waste Isolation Pilot Project in New Mexico is the only one that we can really refer to, right? The problem with Yucca Mountain was there was the calculation for how much nuclear waste you can put in the mountain was based on heat. So how much heat can the mountain withstand? Because the fuel is pumping out energy all the time, so it's splitting atoms. And so the same thing, that same thing should be applied to a deep geological repository. But that's not in that equation at all. And so for Yucca Mountain, right, what they were going to do, they were going to, at the very end of it, they were like, well, we can fill the mountain up with air conditioners. But then what happens if the air conditioners break, right? If you lose power for extended period. And it turned out, of course, we've covered it over the last decade extensively, was that the Yucca Mountain, they had earthquakes 2-3 years ago right alongside of it. So it's a really good thing it didn't happen. So a deep geological repository is a reckless gamble posing a grave threat to the present and future generations. So I don't believe that Gary Kenny would have wrote deep ground repository. It would have been deep underground repository. But the editors of the media decided to misrepresent, to make it harder for people to appreciate it was an important story, basically. So they want to build a 1 square kilometer surface where they're going to repackage all the nuclear waste for the Canadian Nuclear Waste Management Organization that tricked and deceived. For 22 years, they had $26 billion and never grew a cent of interest. That's what they want you to believe. They had $26 billion when they started 22 years ago. They got $26 billion today. They haven't built anything. There's a lot of interest on $26 billion, particularly when you're the government. Where did all the interest go? Is there any proof they actually got $26 billion in the bank, that they haven't looted that for the nuclear industry? I'd be very suspect in that one. So typically they want prime farmland to do any of this, because everything is vented on the way there on the highways, so that everything on both sides of the highway is going to be hideously contaminated, and everything in the local 100-kilometer area is going to be hideously, monstrously radioactive, because everything is vented, everything's repackaged at the surface, and then they're going to do the stupidest thing imaginable, is they're going to put it deep down in the ground, where it's going to melt down at some point. It could be next year, it could be 5 years, it could be 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 years, but it will melt down. Once it starts burning at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, it doesn't need oxygen. It'll take all the other nuclear waste with it. You can never live on the planet again at some point because of this. All is not as it seems with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, I'll say. Degenerates, just before they were going to have the referendum, they hacked my main computer, the one we're using, the small one we're using. Like, my big system was hacked too, don't get me wrong, and they killed the hard drive. They done it, and at the time I wasn't even aware it happened till the day after. So they done all that, and they didn't need to do it, but they didn't have anybody else to pick on. They were just covering bases, right? All is not as it seems with the non-nuclear waste management organizations. You need another N in front of that one because they haven't managed anything, And they're still 40 years away from trying to manage it. They're not trying to manage it. It's been 22 years looking for a place, and every place they looked at was controversy after controversy in people's backyards over and over and over. Leaving it at the site is not a good idea because you got a big population. They're all going to get poisoned from the perpetual emissions of the radioactive isotopes because the fuel is all splitting atoms. And you're talking about 5.5 million fuel assemblies splitting atoms, and nothing is contained. And the worst ones are when they put it in the fuel pools where it's boiling off 120,000 liters in each one every day. And there's so many atoms, anthropogenic, man-made, harmful atoms per, and it never goes away. It's released directly into the biosphere. And it's right alongside the Great Lakes, right? The whole legacy of this is just utterly monstrous. There's no other way to describe these people. And if it was illegal to poison you with radiation, these things couldn't exist, could they? They poison everybody and every species on the planet with radiation. Instead of the nuclear regulatory commissions, should the Congress and parliaments, the government themselves, have the authority to make it illegal to harm you or hurt you or kill you with anthropogenic man-made radiation or radiation fallout? This is like a no-brainer. So this is such an important story. The trucks, when they're on the highways, are hemorrhaging radiation. They're not sealed, because when you seal fuel, what you got to do is you got to put helium in there, or argon. I'm not sure, but I know typically they were using helium, and displaces the oxygen. If you introduce oxygen back into the environment, it'll detonate, and what that means is everything is vented on the highway. Right? We know that because they want to repackage it. So the only way you can do that is if everything is vented. And everything that goes to the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, WWIII in New Mexico, where they had a nuclear meltdown in the same deep geological repository, and they come out and successfully covered up and said it was cat litter. Like, don't underestimate how evil and insidious and monstrous every one of these people in the nuclear industry actually are. What kind of threat they are to the existence of the species and humanity. They have already compromised the future of all species and humanity. Even without a nuclear meltdown, all the emissions from the fuel pools worldwide will eventually kill every species on this planet. Because it never goes away and it bioaccumulates every day. And the numbers we're talking about, for 1,000 fuel pools hemorrhaging radiation, I can't see why there's not 1 million people screaming their heads off. It has now had the 2 willing host communities, which the willingness, something I've never heard. And of all the stuff we've covered for waste repositories, we've never heard the word willing or willingness. And so the Canadians, they like to go extra scumbaggery. And what they done was they got this company to come and barbarize people with propaganda. There is no willing host. They had a 51-49% vote, and they jumped on it. And no one can prove it because the company that they hired, right, to do the poll is the only ones who can see who voted what. All they got to do is say it was 51 to 49%. Have a nice day. And there was no way to appeal it. Try to wrap your mind around that. And in one of the communities, the town council showed up for an emergency vote just before they made their decisions, conveniently, where they spent millions and millions of dollars in this little tiny town. The idiot little inbreed town council members showed up and voted for the community. So the community, they said the community didn't want to vote. Told there is no community out there won't want an input. And now every child there will end up sick for 1,000 square miles. And every animal will eventually die from the emissions from these disease factories. They won't be as blatant out in the open. They'll be in the forest. But the statement, it won't rot because you killed all the bacteria and the fungus. The statement is only the latest in a string of attempts by the non-nuclear waste management organization to gaslight you and me in the Northwest Ontario public. Eventually, the fuel, once they bury it underground, it catches fire and it erupts everywhere for millions of years, hemorrhaging radiation. That's the ultimate outcome. They like building it around major farming communities because that way you shift the radiation out of the local area regularly, see? The emissions from this site is going to be insane just from the venting because they're going to repackage it, which means the highway is going to be completely contaminated the whole way there for over 1,000 miles. So the native community didn't agree to build a repository. They only agreed to continue with the process of site characterization, which is just going around digging core samples and stuff like that, or environmental assessments. They didn't rubber stamp the building of a deep geological repository, the DGR. DGR. Well, ain't that interesting? Because in the title they don't call it DGR, Deep Geological Repository. They call it a Deep Ground Nuclear Repository. And unless you got no English skills whatsoever, you would call it a Deep Geological Repositories. So the author avoided it in the headlines, but when it was convenient for him, they called it a Deep Geological Repository in the bottom of that sentence, right? The problem is, once you can't monitor it and deal with it, it will melt down. It'll burn at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. It'll take everything else with it. It doesn't need oxygen to burn. So there. My goodness, had a hard time getting the show up and running tonight. It's very frustrating when that happens to me. The community yes vote does not signify approval of the project to build a deep geological repository, said Chief Clayton. In the post-referendum statement, right, we've covered that. The non-nuclear waste management organization knows this, of course, and that is why its statement to the contrary demonstrates the lengths to which it will go to manufacture consent. Well said. According to WWIII, the Nuclear Free North, and we interviewed some of them, right? The Nuclear Waste Management Organization has used the township of Ignis, which didn't vote, and that the WWIII Free North went there and knocked on the doors and got a resounding no vote for Deep Geological Repository. As a proxy decision maker, excluding the victims, the residents, and the communities in the surrounding areas. The word downstream is the wrong word to use. The wind doesn't just blow one way from the site and along transportation routes. So using downstream is ignoring the fact that this will go to Saskatchewan, this will go to the Northwest Territory, the radioactive fallout will still go to Ontario, still go to Quebec, still go to the eastern provinces, still pollute the St. Lawrence. Curiously, Ignis is more than 45 kilometers from Revel area and is a different watershed. They got an absurd, a ridiculous, wonderful amount of freshwater lakes there. I'm not sure the real numbers. I was there in Ignis in 2019, and I believe there was 7,000 or plus, don't quote me, 7,000 plus freshwater ponds. There are many communities closer to the deep geological repository. Got it there again. Ground zero, then curiously have not been consulted. Because that's what the acronym should have been used for the title, Deep Geological Repositories, not Deep Ground Nuclear Dump. Ultimately, it melts down and everything becomes uninhabitable for 1 million years. And I know the natives are got lawsuits or planning lawsuits, and that's the only hope we got now is they succeed. And then there are many, many communities along the thousands of kilometers long route, thousands of kilometers, because you got to ship it all the way from New Brunswick, from Point Le Pure, by the way, right? These Cantu reactors, Point Le Pure releases legally 14,600,000 trillion atoms a year into the environment. Typically, that's the number you would consider a catastrophic accident at a nuclear plant. And tritium-3H, which is a 120-year lifespan, 12-year half-life. So 3 shipments each day for 9 months of the year for 50 years or longer, with over 40,000 shipments. So it's going to hemorrhage radiation on the highway the whole time. So all the food grown there is going to be incredibly radioactive for that entire legacy. And the Free North adds the deep geological, there it is again, right? So the author that put the headline up, why didn't they use Deep Geological Repository for the title of the story? The song. A deep geological repository is beyond risky. It's an experimental, reckless gamble, posing a grave threat to the present and future generations. Gary Kenny. Thank you, Gary. That's a great story. He done great, but I think the editor of the media, somebody made a purposeful mistake by not putting an appropriate headline, because that's what you're going to find the story is, that headline. So eventually this is what's going to happen to that site. It's going to be lava all over the place underneath it that'll breach the surface, and you can't go there, can't live there. That's the future. Florida's finally getting its radioactive road come full circle. The EPA gave a great big thumbs up to a pilot project that uses radioactive material in road building. Well, they gone and done it. A company in Florida got last-minute approval last week from the Biden's Environmental Protection Agencies to build a practice road using radioactive materials. Seems like such an obvious bad idea, but a bad idea never stopped the government. Yeah. Well said, eh? Courtesy of Mosaic Fertilizer. Well, it's just crazy. And of course, fertilizer is considered one of the biggest problems for the coastlines. But the minute you roll out, you take Fukushima out of that equation, is the minute you're not honest any longer, too, right? But it's definitely a problem. Phosphogypsum, the calcium sulfate hydrate formed as a byproduct of the production of fertilizer, particularly phosphorus acid from phosphorus rocks, is mainly composed of gypsum, although is widely used material in the construction industry. The phosphogypsum is usually not used, but is stored indefinitely because of its weak radioactivity. We've seen 300 counts per minute on the Geiger counter in the video today. So it's not weak. It's weak to compared to nuclear fuel, but that's still catastrophic numbers we're talking about. Caused by natural uranium and thorium and radon and polonium. And you know what they done with the radon? Like, if you look at what this industry, how it poisoned people with radium. Hang on, let me bring it up here. I'm a sucker for punishment today. I'll be a lot better tomorrow. I always hate it when this show can't go live because of problems, because then I got to work a lot harder. I shouldn't say hate it, but it's a little tougher on me. I always got to type in twice to do my searches. I started like a month ago or something when I got hacked by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. Here we go. This is fun stuff. This should make you feel all warm and giddy inside. Radium. They actually had fireplaces that were radium, sitting in front of a dirty bomb. I wonder how it worked out for them in the end. They had radium light bulbs. Just to call these people scumbags simply doesn't do it credit. That's not good enough for you. They had 20,000 tubes of radium for experimental photography. These are insane contamination. I would never buy an antique anymore after seeing this stuff. That blows my mind. They had radium fireplaces. So it was just radium in a box and would generate all this heat, but it also generated gamma and all this shine and neutrons type effects. Radium hand cleaner. I mean, it's absurd because Marie Curie lost both of her hands discovering radium. And here you're going to take radium, put it on. Now, so they knew it. Radium foot warmers. This is probably the scariest. Like, that's a dirty bomb. That's a huge dirty bomb, basically. Radium razor blades. There's some sick, sick people. They even got kids sitting there with radium heaters. Man. So anybody that's using that would have got sick and died a few years later, or right away. Radium and beauty. They had radium lipstick, radium eyeshadow. They targeted little children too, right? Radium toothpaste. Radium makeup. They had the jugs of radium infused into pottery, and you would pour your water in there and drink the radioactive water, and this was supposed to make you feel good and happy, and it did in one way, but then your teeth and your jaws started to fall apart, and then they got out of business. All of these were put out of business by massive lawsuits from people that bought into it and had enough money to come after them. Some of us, it's just absolutely unspeakable what they done. Like drinking radioactive water will destroy your jaws. Your jaws will literally fall apart. And we got examples of it. Radium chocolates. Pretty crazy, eh? This one blows my mind. Radium spray, the new combination bug killer. Can you imagine? I should take your advertisement. Only problem is I'm going to get raided if I start pretending I'm selling this stuff. They'll be doing documentaries calling me a terrorist for the rest of my life. Your lives. Guaranteed by grocers and druggists to kill all insects and vermin. You know, possums and raccoons and everything else. It's guaranteed to kill. It's like, it gets worse. They had radium spray. You would spray it on your. This is why I won't buy antique furniture, because you can. They were people were buying this by the herds, and there was other material put in there to give it a shine. They spray it on all their furniture, under tables, under chairs, just typewriters, cash registers, furniture, buggies, automobiles, marbles, tile, brass, will polish and clean. Sure death for disinfectants, good for a polisher, dust layers, disinfectant, deodorizer. Mosquitoes, roaches, bed bugs, sprayed it in your bed, spray dirty bombs in your bed. And your carpets, your rugs, your mattings, your nickel, your brass, tile, marble, polish your car. So I wouldn't buy anything from that era because it's going to be radioactive for at least another 4,000 or 5,000 years. These are monsters. Yeah, they had radioactive suppositories too. There's nothing sacred. Rheumatism. If it doesn't get rid of the rheumatism, you get a $5,000 reward. But nobody lived long enough to collect it because of the radioactive poisoning. But again, the most frightening thing I've ever seen in the nuclear industry, and I've seen my share, is radium spray used for cleaning everything but a guilty conscience. Radium spray is a liquid cleaner and polisher, dust layer, disinfectant, odor. It's a sure death to you, your kids, your future kids, the next people that moves into the house for 1,000 years. Any house that used this stuff should be torn down, right? Put in a nuclear dump. Today even, right? But polished and cleaned furniture, so that's why you shouldn't buy antique furniture without a Geiger counter. Under no circumstances. Because at one point this was prolific throughout North America. So pretty well 90% of the furniture, antique furniture out there would have been polished by this. Tell me that's not, and tell me they're not evil when they know exactly what was going to happen. They've never apologized, and they've been taken to court. And the only way to stop was they were taken to court eventually. To be evil. Must be nice. No conscience. Everything but a guilty conscience. Well, I got no worry about that. Nuclear industry doesn't have a conscience. At all. It just gives me the woolies thinking about it, eh? Being evil is so much fun, I bet. Alrighty, that's it for me tonight. We're going to try, I'm not guarantee I'm doing a show tomorrow, but I'm going to try to do a show early tomorrow. Just a short show. It might be a half an hour, it might be an hour. I might with me, sometimes you don't know, because I might start talking and I stop for 3 hours. It could happen. It's happened before. Instead of Nuclear Regulatory Commission, should Congress and parliaments have the authority to make it illegal to harm you with anthropogenic man-made radiation, harm, maim, and kill you? Because currently it's not. That is friggin' terrifying. James Lewis has done it again. He's here with another song. This is a doozy. Maralinga, Australia. They actually detonated 700 dirty bombs in Maralinga, where they took uranium and plutonium that's gone through a chain reaction, covered it, surrounded it with conventional explosives and detonated. And we have some of the scientists that worked on the project in their elder years had pains of conscience, and there was documentaries done about it. And we're going to play that song tonight. And that's over at James' site. You'll find links below. There's actually a playlist of anti-nuclear music. James is the first guy in history, first off, to create as much anti-nuclear music. And now he's doing AI. So everything you saw, the videos you're watching, he's created, which is a pretty cool thing to do. So Maralinga is in Australia. And I think everybody in Australia should watch this video. We'll catch everybody tomorrow, hopefully. Then the next show will be on Thursday. I'll leave everybody alone for tomorrow night, for New Year's Day, and come back and harass you from January till Christmas Eve next year. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Take care.
Desert where red dust flies, they lit the sky with fire and lies. White men came, took the land by hand, and drew their plans in sacred sand. And Nungu watched as they tore through dreams, poisoned the air, polluted the streams. The land cried out, but no one cared. They left our future broken and bared. They called it progress, we call solid pain. The bombs they dropped left a fiery stain. Maralinga, your bones still sing. The red land mourns for everything. Ghosts rise high in the desert sky, while the Anangu still wonder why. Maralinga, buried and burned. The lessons are there but never return. The wounds run deep in the heart of the earth. Australia cries for what it's worth. The Canada land where red dust flies, they lit the sky with fire and lies. White men came, took the land by hand, and drew their plans in sacred sand. Anangu watched as they tore through dreams, poisoned the air, polluted the streams. The land cried out, but no one cared. They left our future broken and bare. They called and hide the facts, but the desert knows Maralinga's story wherever he goes. Maralinga, your bones still sing. The red land mourns for everything. Ghosts rise high in the desert sky, while the Anangu still wonder why. Maralinga, buried and burned. The lessons are there but never returned. The wounds run deep in the heart of the earth. Australia cries for what it's worth. They promised the land would heal with time, but time don't mend radioactive crime. Decades pass, the truth still hides in glowing sand where fallout lies. Maralinga, your bones still sing. The red land mourns for everything. Ghosts rise high in the desert sky, while the Anangu still wonder why.